Did you like the lake house I gave you, Mom? David's question from that Thanksgiving years ago had once blindsided me, but nothing compared to the call I got last Tuesday. Ma'am, the man said, his voice steady but unsure. I believe a Rolex with your husband's initials was sold here yesterday. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The sound of my own heartbeat filled the kitchen. My husband's watch. His gold and steel Rolex, the one I had polished with trembling hands the night before his funeral. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, my voice barely a whisper. Could you repeat that? Yes, ma'am, he said softly. It was engraved, to Robert. My forever, dated 1987. It matched a missing item alert from our database. I just thought you should know. I thanked him and hung up slowly, staring at the calendar on the wall. November 3rd Road, my husband's birthday. The day they'd sold his watch. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. I sat at the kitchen table where Robert used to read the newspaper every morning. The same table where we'd planned our retirement by the lake, before his heart gave out one cold March morning 3 years ago. The Rolex had been the only thing he wore every day. He'd received it when his company promoted him to regional director, back when we still believed loyalty meant something. After he passed, I kept it in a small velvet box on my dresser. I'd open it on hard days, just to see the way the morning light caught the gold rim, and imagine his laugh filling the room again. I lived modestly after that, on his pension, my savings, and the company of our cat, Cleo. My days were quiet, coffee at dawn, a walk to the mailbox, then tending to the small rose garden Robert had planted for me behind the porch. My life wasn't exciting, but it was steady, peaceful. Until that phone call. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, my knees stiff from the cold. The velvet box sat exactly where I always kept it, top drawer. Right side. I pulled it open, empty. Just the faint outline of where the watch had rested for years. My fingers brushed the soft fabric. No dust, no indentation, no trace. Someone had opened this drawer recently. I tried to think logically. Maybe I'd taken it out for cleaning? But the lid was perfectly aligned, just as I always left it. The kind of detail only I would notice, unless someone had tried to make it look that way on purpose. 2 weeks earlier, my son and his wife had visited. David and Victoria, always perfectly dressed, always in a hurry. They'd stayed less than an hour, sipping their lattes while showing me photos of their upcoming, well-deserved break in Hawaii. Mom, you'd love the resort, Victoria had said, flipping through her phone. Ocean view, private pool, champagne at sunset. I'd smiled, though the numbers spinning in my head made me dizzy. A trip like that would cost more than Robert and I spent in 6 months of living. When they left, Victoria hugged me perfunctorily and whispered, "You should really think about selling some of those old things. Myrtle, memories don't pay property taxes." I thought she was just being practical. Now, her words scraped through my mind like broken glass. I sat back on the bed, staring at the empty box. The silence felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. Had they really done it? Sold Robert's watch, the last piece of him I had left, for their vacation? My stomach twisted. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. Instead, I stood up slowly, breathing through the ache in my chest. When you reach my age, you learn the difference between anger and heartbreak. Heartbreak makes noise. Anger moves in silence. I went back downstairs and poured myself some tea. The spoon clinked against the cup, steady, deliberate, like I could stir the chaos out of my head. Robert used to say, "When something feels wrong, don't chase it, wait, truth has a way of finding you." Maybe that was what this phone call was. A piece of truth knocking politely at my door. I wrote down the pawn shop's name and address from the caller ID. Dixon's Jewelry and Loan, 14th Street. Brookfield, just 20 minutes away. I looked at the clock on the wall. 10:42 a.m. By 11, I was already reaching for my coat. The autumn wind cut through my cardigan as I stepped outside. The driveway still had tire marks from David's SUV. They'd been here only days ago. I locked the front door behind me and stood there for a moment, staring at the faded wreath Robert had hung the year before he died. It swayed gently in the wind, like it wanted to say something I already knew but didn't want to hear. "I'll bring it home," I murmured, "I promise." The drive downtown was quiet, save for the old gospel station playing softly through the static. Each stoplight gave me time to think about the last Thanksgiving we'd shared, about the way David's eyes used to light up when he talked to his father, about how those eyes now looked away whenever I mentioned anything sentimental. Grief changes people, but greed erases them. When I parked outside Dixon's Jewelry and Loan, the sign above the door flickered with half-dead neon lights. I hesitated before pushing the door open. The faint smell of metal polish and dust greeted me. Behind the counter stood a man in his 50s. Gray beard, kind eyes that looked both cautious and apologetic. "You must be Mrs. Turner," he said gently. "I'm Frank. We spoke on the phone." "Yes," I managed. "You said, about the watch." He nodded, reaching under the counter for a small cloth pouch. My breath caught as he opened it and revealed the familiar gleam of gold and steel. Even under the dim lights, I could see the engraving clearly. "To Robert, my forever love, Myrtle, 1987. I touched it lightly with my fingertips. It was cold, too cold. "I didn't buy it," Frank said quickly. "The young couple who brought it in said it was theirs, part of a family estate. But something about the story felt off. So I checked our records and found your name." "A couple?" I asked, though my voice already knew the answer. He hesitated. "Yes, early 30s, well-dressed. The woman, blonde. The man had your eyes." My knees nearly gave way. I gripped the counter for support. Frank looked at me sadly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I thought you'd want to know." I nodded, swallowing hard. "You did the right thing." I stepped out into the cold November air, clutching the pouch against my chest. Cars passed, horns blaring, people moving on with their lives. Inside that little velvet bag was 30 years of love, traded for a week in paradise. And yet, for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel powerless. Some truths hurt, others set you free. And this one, this truth, had just opened a door I didn't know I was ready to walk through. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Every red light lasted forever. Every car horn pulled me further away from the world I thought I knew. When I parked, the house looked smaller, like the walls had caved in a little, carrying the weight of what I'd learned. I hung my coat, still clutching the pouch. The watch was back in my hands. But the comfort I thought it would bring never came. It was just heavy now. Cold. I placed it on the table beside Robert's old photo. His smile looked the same, steady, kind, trusting. For the first time, I couldn't look back at it. Cleo brushed against my ankle, purring softly, as if she knew I needed something living near me. I knelt and ran a hand down her back. "They sold your dad's watch," I whispered. "Can you believe that?" The words felt strange leaving my mouth, like I was saying them for someone else. Some other woman who hadn't already lost enough. I made myself some coffee. It tasted bitter, but I drank it anyway. The warmth kept me anchored. On the kitchen counter, their family Christmas cards still sat, David, Victoria, and their perfect smiles in front of a snow-dusted cabin. "Our best year yet," the card read. I let out a quiet laugh. It said, but it wasn't ours anymore. That evening, I called David. He didn't answer. Then Victoria picked up on the second try. Her tone was sweet, practiced. "Oh, hi, Mom. We just got back last night. Hawaii was incredible. You'd love the sunsets." I listened. She filled the silence with stories about poolside cocktails and spa treatments. Then, when she finally paused to breathe, I said it quietly. "Victoria, where's your father's watch?" For a moment, she said nothing. I could almost hear the air leave her lungs. Then she laughed, soft. Quick, rehearsed. Oh, that old thing? David said you wanted to have it cleaned. Didn't you? I don't recall saying that. Well, maybe you forgot. You've been through a lot. Myrtle, her voice lowered, careful and sharp at the same time. You shouldn't stress yourself with little things. Little things. I stared at the phone, hearing my heartbeat in the static. Tell David the first called, I said, and hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat by the window, watching the fog roll over the garden. Robert's roses were still blooming, stubborn against the November frost. He'd always said they were fighters, just like me. Around midnight, I opened my notebook, the one I used to track bills and grocery lists, and wrote down everything Frank had told me. Date, time, shop name, description. The words looked too neat for what they meant. When I finished, I placed the notebook next to the watch and turned off the lamp. I thought about Robert again, how he trusted people easily, how he believed our son would always do right by me. He'd been wrong, but I couldn't be angry with him for that. Love makes you blind in kind ways. The next morning, I called Frank. Mr. Dixon, I said, do you keep copies of the sale receipts? Yes, ma'am, he replied. Everything's digital now. I can print one for you if you'd like. I drove back to the shop after lunch. Frank handed me a folded paper across the counter. The ink was still fresh. There it was, David's signature at the bottom, bold and unmistakable. He hadn't even bothered to fake it. Thank you, I said, tucking it into my purse. Ma'am, Frank said quietly, you gonna report it? Not yet, I replied. Some debts collect themselves. On the way home, I stopped by the cemetery. The wind was colder than before, and the oak trees whispered the kind of sounds you only hear when you're alone. I placed the watch on Robert's gravestone for a moment and whispered, "It's safe now." Then I picked it up and put it back in my pocket. I wasn't ready to leave it there, not until I'd made things right. When I got home, the answering machine blinked. One new message. "Hey Mom, it's David. I saw you called. Everything okay?" His voice was casual, light. "We'll swing by this weekend. We brought you something from the trip." Something from the trip. I looked at the folded receipt in my hand, then at the watch. I almost laughed again. That night, I prepared dinner for one. Grilled cheese and tomato soup, the simplest comfort food I knew. I set 2 bowls on the table anyway. Habit dies slowly. Across from me, Robert's chair stayed empty, the candlelight flickering against the framed photo above it. I thought of the watch's ticking when it was on his wrist. Steady and confident. Then I thought of how silent it was now. I reached for my pen again. Under yesterday's notes, I wrote one more line. This isn't about the watch anymore. It's about what they think they can take. I folded the paper neatly and slipped it inside the pouch with the Rolex. Then I closed my eyes and breathed. Some people pray before they act. I plan. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance a train passed, its whistle long and low. I waited until it faded, then whispered into the quiet. "Robert, I'll handle it, in my own way." Saturday came with a sky the color of pewter, the kind of gray that made everything else look smaller. I woke early, brewed coffee, and watched steam curl from the cup while the clock ticked louder than usual. They were coming today. At 11 sharp, the sound of tires on gravel broke the quiet. Through the window, I saw David's SUV, polished, expensive, spotless. Victoria stepped out first, her hair perfectly straight, her smile already prepared. David followed, holding a glossy gift bag that shimmered in the pale light. "Mom," he called, voice too bright, "we brought you something from Hawaii." I forced a smile and opened the door. The air carried the smell of rain and their perfume. They hugged me like strangers, arms light, hearts elsewhere. Victoria handed me the bag. Inside was a seashell necklace, the kind sold at every airport kiosk. "We thought of you," she said. I nodded. "That's kind." They made small talk about the trip, how the sand felt like silk, how the champagne tasted sweeter at sunset. I listened, pretending to care, while the watch in my pocket pressed against my thigh like a secret heartbeat. When Victoria turned away to adjust her scarf, I caught David's eyes. For a brief second, guilt flashed there, then disappeared behind his practiced calm. Lunch was awkward. I'd made stew, the way Robert used to like it, thick and rich. David barely touched it. Victoria scrolled through her phone, sighing dramatically at a photo. The resort already posted our pictures, she said, showing me the screen. Palm trees, cocktails, David's arm around her shoulders. I stirred my soup slowly. Must have been a beautiful trip. It was, she replied. We really needed it after all the stress lately. I looked at David. Yes, I can imagine how stressful it is, selling family heirlooms. The spoon froze halfway to his mouth. His eyes flicked up, searching my face. Victoria's smile faltered. What do you mean? She asked carefully. I set the spoon down. Mr. Dixon sends his regards. He's quite the gentleman. Silence, the kind that stretches so far you can hear the clock ticking in the next room. David opened his mouth, then closed it again. Victoria leaned forward, her voice thin. I don't know what you think you know. But. I raised a hand. I don't want lies in my kitchen. Her cheeks flushed pink. David exhaled through his nose. Mom, we were going to tell you. When? I asked. Before or after you spent the money? He looked down, tracing circles on the table with his thumb. We needed it, just for a little while. The bills were piling up. Bills? I repeated. For beachfront cocktails? His jaw tightened. You wouldn't understand. No, I said softly. I wouldn't, because when your father and I were your age, we worked for what we wanted. We didn't pawn love to pay for leisure. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. You're being dramatic, Myrtle. It was just a watch. I looked at her, long enough for her to shift uncomfortably. It was his heart on my wrist. But I suppose that means nothing to you. David's voice cracked slightly. We'll pay you back. I nodded slowly. Yes, one way or another. You will. After they left, the house smelled faintly of perfume and guilt. The front door closed with a softness that felt like finality. I stood there a while, listening to the echo of their footsteps fading down the driveway. Then I went to the table, picked up the gift bag, and dropped it into the trash. The seashells rattled against the tin, hollow and cheap. I poured myself another cup of coffee. Outside, rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, until it sounded like applause from an unseen crowd. Robert's photo watched me from the mantel. You'd have told me to let it go, I whispered, but you also taught me to finish what started. I reached for my notebook, opened to the page with the receipt, and added a new line beneath it. They lied to my face, and called it family. By evening, the rain stopped. The air smelled of wet soil and forgiveness I didn't feel ready to give. I took the watch from my pocket and wound it gently until it ticked again. The sound filled the room. Steady, certain. Each click reminded me that time moves forward, whether people deserve it or not. I placed it back on the dresser, not in the drawer this time, but right in the open, where sunlight could find it in the morning. Some things deserve to be seen. Before going to bed, I called Frank again. Would you mind keeping a copy of that receipt safe for me? Of course, he said. You thinking of taking action? Not yet, I answered. Just keeping records. Some storms don't need thunder. They just need time. He understood. Take care of yourself, Mrs. Turner. I will, I said, and thank you. That night, I lay awake listening to the clock ticking beside my bed, the echo of Robert's old watch keeping pace. Every sound felt like a promise, a steady reminder that silence is never the same as surrender. I closed my eyes and smiled faintly. Let them think I'm done, I murmured. That's their mistake. The morning after felt strangely quiet, as if the house was waiting for something. I moved slowly through the rooms, collecting coffee cups, folding the blanket on the couch, putting the world back into order. It was how I calmed the noise in my head. Outside, the rain had washed the yard clean. The roses glistened, their petals heavy with water. Robert would have loved that sight. He always said rain made everything honest. I opened the curtains and let the light fall across the table. The notebook still lay open. The last sentence underlined in red pen. They lied to my face. And called it family. I traced the words with my finger. They felt colder than the ink that made them. The phone rang. I didn't rush to answer it. Mrs. Turner, a man's voice said when I picked up. This is Jonathan from Grayson and Mills. I worked with your husband on his estate documents. I was reviewing some old files and realized we never updated the asset transfer for personal items. Would you like to schedule a meeting? I hesitated. The word estate sat heavy in my ear. Personal items? Yes, jewelry, heirlooms, things like that. There's a clause about them staying in your possession unless formally gifted. I looked toward the dresser upstairs, where the watch ticked softly. I think I should come in, I said. The law office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. The receptionist smiled politely, then led me to a small room with a mahogany desk and framed degrees on the wall. Jonathan was younger than I expected, maybe in his 40s, with careful eyes. He greeted me with a handshake. I'm glad you came in. Mrs. Turner, I've gone through your husband's file. There's something you might want to see. He slid a document across the desk. This lists the items specifically protected under Robert Turner's personal clause. His watch is one of them. That means it legally belongs to you alone. No one else had the right to sell it. I studied the paper. The letters swam for a moment before settling into focus. To remain in the possession of my wife, Myrtle Turner, for her lifetime. My hands didn't shake. They simply folded the paper neatly. Thank you, I said. Would you like me to file a report? He asked. Not yet. I slipped the document into my purse. But I'll keep this safe. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. The young cashier smiled as she rang up my tea and bread. Beautiful day, isn't it? Yes, I said softly, a very clear one. Back home, the house smelled faintly of lavender and rain. I poured myself some tea and sat at the table, spreading out the papers, receipt, estate clause, notes. It was all there, neatly aligned, like puzzle pieces finally showing the full picture. Cleo jumped onto the chair beside me. I scratched behind her ear. He left me everything. You know, everything except their decency. She purred as if in agreement. Later that evening, the phone buzzed again. David. I stared at the screen before answering. Mom, he said, his tone softer this time. Look, about yesterday, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let things get that far. Did you know what you were signing? I asked. A pause. Victoria said it was just for cleaning. I didn't think she'd actually. Don't, I interrupted. Don't hand her your guilt. You wore it just fine yesterday. He sighed. I'll make it right. I'll get the money back. I looked at the watch on the table. It's not about money anymore. David. What is it about then? Respect, I said, the kind you can't pawn. He didn't answer. I could hear him breathing. Slow and shallow, like a boy caught in a lie he hadn't learned to live with yet. Tell Victoria, I added, that her name won't be in my will. Neither will yours until you remember who you were raised by. Mom. I hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in Robert's chair by the window. The watch ticking quietly on my wrist now. It felt heavier than it used to. As if it carried every heartbeat I'd wasted forgiving the wrong people. I remembered when Robert first gave it to me to hold, on our 30th anniversary. He'd slipped it off his wrist and said, "Keep this safe, Myrtle, it's more than time, it's proof of it." I'd laughed then. I didn't understand what he meant. I do now. The memory softened something inside me. But only for a moment. Then the quiet sharpened again. I turned the light off and sat in the dark, listening to the rhythm of the watch. Each tick was an answer. Calm and final. They thought they'd taken something from me. But all they did was give me proof. The next morning, I drafted a letter. Just a short one. No anger, no threats. Just a note addressed to David and Victoria. I know what you did. I know what it means. I have the documents. I have the truth. Use the time you bought wisely. Because I won't be silent again. I folded it, sealed it, and placed it on the mantel beside Robert's photo. Not to send, just to remind myself that silence can be sharper than words. Outside, the sun rose slowly over the wet roses. Another day, another tick of the watch. And this time, it was ticking for me. 3 days passed before anyone showed up again. I'd stopped expecting them, but the sound of the doorbell still made me flinch. When I opened it, Ruth was standing there, my older sister. Her coat half-buttoned, her face drawn with that look she gets when she knows something. "I heard about the watch," she said quietly, stepping inside before I could answer. "David called me, said you're overreacting." I laughed once, dry and hollow. Did he also mention he forged his father's name on a sale receipt? She sighed, slipping her gloves off. "He's scared, Myrtle, afraid you'll cut him out for good." "He should be." Ruth followed me into the kitchen. The table was still covered with papers, receipts, legal clauses, letters. She glanced at them, then at me. "You've always been the one who keeps everything tidy," she said softly, "even your revenge." I poured her coffee. "Black. It's not revenge, Ruth, it's clarity." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Finally she said, "Do you want me to talk to him?" "No," I replied. "He has to sit with what he's done. Words from anyone else would just give him a way out." She nodded slowly. "You sound like Robert." I looked toward his photograph on the wall. I learned from the best. After Ruth left, the house felt still again. I folded the papers into a neat pile and placed them in the drawer beneath the phone. The letter I'd written to David and Victoria remained on the mantel, untouched. That afternoon, a white envelope slid through the mail slot, my name written in David's handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a check for $10,000 and a note on plain paper. "Mom, this covers what we got for the watch and more. Please, let's not turn this into something ugly. We love you." No apology, no ownership, just a transaction. I folded the check in half. Then again, until it was small enough to fit in the palm of my hand. Then I set it beside the trash can and lit a match. The flame ate through the paper slowly, curling the corners into ash. "Ugly," I murmured, "was your choice." The next morning, I visited the bank. The manager, an older woman named Evelyn, greeted me with warmth. "Mrs. Turner, lovely to see you. How can I help today?" "I'd like to update my beneficiaries," I said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Of course. Any changes?" "Yes," I said. "Remove David Turner and Victoria Turner. Add Ruth Jennings." Evelyn hesitated just a second before typing. "Understood." When she handed me the new form, I signed without a tremor. "Thank you," I said, slipping the copy into my purse. Walking out of the bank, I felt lighter, not because of anger, but because of release. Sometimes love has to be buried next to the lies it dies with. That night, David called again. I let it ring until the voicemail picked up. His voice came through the machine, softer than before. "Mom, I know you're angry. I'm sorry. All right, we made a mistake. Can we start over?" The apology hung there, floating in the quiet. I stared at the blinking light for a long time before pressing delete. No reply, no closure, just silence. A few evenings later, I was in the garden trimming back the roses. The air was sharp, filled with the smell of damp earth. The wind carried faint sounds from the road, a car passing, a dog barking, the world continuing as if nothing had broken. Frank pulled up in his truck, stepping out with a small box in his hands. "Brought this by for you," he said, smiling gently. "Had my jeweler friend clean it up. No charge." He handed me the box. Inside, the Rolex gleamed again, restored, polished, quietly alive. It deserved better than a pawn shelf, he said. I nodded. So did I. We talked a while, about his shop, about the weather, about small things that filled the empty spaces people leave behind. When he drove away, I stood there under the porch light, holding the box close to my chest. The night felt calm, For the first time in weeks, I felt Robert near, not in the watch, but in the strength it took to keep breathing. Later, I sat at my desk and began writing again. Not to David, not to Victoria, just to myself. Some people think forgiveness is weakness. Maybe it is, but silence, that's power. It lets the guilty talk themselves into corners while you rebuild the room. I placed the paper inside the same pouch as the watch. Not as evidence this time, but as memory. The clock struck midnight. The house was still, the air heavy but clean. I turned off the light and whispered, "Rest now, Robert. The time they stole is back where it belongs." The days slipped by quietly after that. I filled them with small routines, watering the plants, feeding Cleo, writing grocery lists I rarely followed. The world looked the same. But it wasn't. Everything had shifted by an inch. Just enough to make me see the cracks I used to ignore. On Thursday morning, the mailman brought another envelope. This one wasn't from David, it was from the attorney, Jonathan. I opened it at the kitchen table, the same spot where Robert used to read the paper. Mrs. Turner, as per your husband's estate clause, any unauthorized sale of listed assets is a violation of state inheritance law. You may pursue restitution or file for removal of heirs from your will. Please contact me when ready. The words were calm, legal, and merciless. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into the drawer beside the others, and exhaled slowly. The house hummed with quiet approval, like even the walls knew justice was a patient thing. That evening, Ruth called. "You sound different," she said. "I am," I replied. "I'm done letting guilt talk louder than truth." She chuckled softly. "That's the Myrtle I remember." We talked for a while about small things, recipes, the cold weather, the town gossip, but under it all was something steady. Strength. It had been gone for years, hiding under grief. Now it was awake again. Friday came with sunlight. I went into the attic to find an old photo album. Dust shimmered in the air as I pulled the box open. Pictures of Robert in his suit. Of David as a boy holding that same Rolex while sitting on his father's lap. I ran my fingers over the faded image. He used to say, "Time is all we have. Son, don't waste it." I wondered if David remembered that at all, or if money had made him deaf to meaning. I closed the album and carried it downstairs. It wasn't nostalgia that made me do it, it was clarity. Every photo told a truth, and I wanted them near when I started over. That afternoon, a car pulled up again. I didn't need to look out the window to know who it was. Victoria's voice carried before she even reached the porch. "Myrtle, please, can we talk?" I opened the door just enough to meet her eyes. They were red-rimmed, mascara smudged. "You already said enough. David's been sick over this," she said quickly. "He can't sleep. He wants to fix things." Then he should have thought about that before signing his name on someone else's memory. She bit her lip. "It was my idea. He wanted to make me happy." I watched her face for a long moment. "You think that makes it better?" Tears filled her eyes, but they didn't fall. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I believed her, but not in the way she wanted. Sorry doesn't undo betrayal, it just names it. "I'm not angry anymore," I said quietly. "But you can't come here again. Myrtle, please." "I wish you well," I said, closing the door softly. The latch clicked like a final line in a book. That night, the house felt lighter. I brewed tea, turned on the radio, and listened to an old Sinatra song. Robert loved that one. He'd tap his watch to the rhythm and wink at me across the room. I smiled, just a little. "You'd be proud," I said to the photo on the mantel. I finally stopped waiting for people to do right by me. Cleo jumped onto the chair beside me, curling up in the glow of the lamp. I reached over and wound the Rolex again, the soft clicks filling the air. Each sound felt like a heartbeat coming back to life. A few days later, I mailed a letter to Jonathan. "Proceed with the heir removal clause. Include attached documentation. All decisions are final." I sealed the envelope, pressed my initials in wax, and left it in the mailbox. The flag stood upright, red against the winter sky. I didn't feel triumphant, just steady, like the world had realigned itself. By sunset, I was out in the garden again. The roses were sleeping for the season. Their stems trimmed short. I touched the soil and whispered, "You made it through another storm." The sky turned a deep violet. The porch light flickered on. I stood there until the chill crept into my hands. Then went inside. On the dresser, the Rolex ticked softly beside Robert's picture. I lifted it once more, feeling its weight. It wasn't a relic anymore. It was a reminder that love, when true, doesn't die with the person, it dies when respect does. And sometimes, bringing respect back means letting the people you love walk out of your story. Before bed, I opened my notebook again. At the bottom of the last page, beneath the ashes of old hurt, I wrote one new line. Time keeps moving, even when hearts stop, but I choose what mine beats for now. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and listened as the watch ticked through the dark, steady and sure, like Robert whispering from another room. "You did good, Myrtle, you did good." Winter settled early that year. The mornings came slower, quieter. I found comfort in small sounds, the hum of the heater, the rustle of Cleo's paws on the floor, the steady tick of Robert's watch. It had been 2 weeks since I mailed the letter to Jonathan. No calls from David, no visits from Victoria, just silence, the kind that used to hurt but now felt like peace. I'd started sleeping again, not deeply, but enough. Each night, I'd wind the watch and whisper, "For one more day," as if Robert could hear me wherever he was. On Wednesday, a letter arrived from the attorney's office. I opened it at the kitchen table, where sunlight fell in stripes across the wood. "Dear Mrs. Turner, we have officially processed your heir removal clause. The assets of Robert Turner's estate are now under your sole protection. All previous beneficiaries have been revoked, as per your directive." I folded the letter and set it beside the watch. For a moment, I just stared at both, time and law, side by side. One carrying memory, the other carrying justice. The air in the room felt still, like something sacred had just finished. That afternoon, Ruth stopped by again, carrying a pie still warm from her oven. "Thought you might like company," she said. "I like quiet more these days," I replied, smiling, "but pie will do." We sat by the window, the light dimming as clouds rolled in. She asked gently, "Do you think they'll ever come around?" I shook my head. "Maybe, but if they do, it won't be here. This house is for peace now." Ruth nodded, cutting the pie into neat slices. "You always were the strong one." "No," I said, "I just finally stopped apologizing for wanting respect." We ate in silence, the kind that feels warm instead of cold. When Ruth left, evening crept in. I lit a candle by Robert's photo. The flame flickered, reflected in the glass of the frame. "You'd laugh if you saw me now," I whispered. "Your watch, your stubborn wife, and a lawyer on speed dial." The thought made me smile. Not out of pride, just quiet understanding. I'd spent years keeping this family together, holding cracks closed with kindness. Maybe letting it break was the only way to make it whole again. The phone rang once more that night. The caller ID flashed David. I let it ring, then ring again. When it stopped, I waited. A minute later, a text appeared. "Mom, please, we didn't mean to lose you too." I read it twice before setting the phone down. No anger, no ache, just a hollow calm. I didn't reply. Some lessons needed silence to echo. I went to the dresser, wound the Rolex again, and watched the second hand sweep forward. Tick, tick, time forgiving nothing, but moving anyway. The next morning, the first snow of the season arrived. It blanketed the garden, soft and unspoiled. I stood by the window, holding my coffee, watching how the world could erase its own scars overnight. Maybe people could too, if they stopped pretending the hurt never happened. Around noon, Frank stopped by again, his jacket dusted white. "Brought you some rock salt," he said. "Roads'll be bad tonight." "Thank you," I said, taking the bag from his hands. He hesitated before leaving. "You okay?" "Mrs. Turner, you look lighter." "I am," I said simply. "Sometimes losing people is how you get your balance back." He smiled, nodded, and left. That evening, I baked cookies for the first time in months. The smell filled the kitchen. Sweet and warm. I left a few by the window for the mailman. A habit from years ago. When I cleaned the counter, my reflection caught in the dark glass of the window, older. Yes, but steadier. The kind of face that had survived storms and still kept its shape. I touched the watch on my wrist. It ticked softly, steady as breath. Before bed, I took out my notebook one last time. On the final page, I wrote a single line in neat cursive. "Justice isn't loud, it's the sound of peace when the noise is gone." I closed the notebook, slid it into the drawer beside the letters, and turned off the light. In the darkness, I could still hear it, the faint, faithful rhythm of the watch. A sound that wasn't about loss anymore, but about living. I smiled into the quiet. "Good night, Robert," I whispered. "Your time kept me safe." The new year came quietly. No fireworks, no calls, no family dinner, just the steady hum of the clock and the faint ticking from the watch on my nightstand. I'd grown used to the silence. It wasn't loneliness anymore, it was peace that had learned how to breathe. Snow still covered the yard. I shoveled only the front steps. Enough for the mailman to walk safely. My world had become smaller. But in that smallness, everything mattered again. The warmth of coffee. The sound of Cleo's purr. The glow of morning light through clean curtains. I no longer waited for apologies. Some people mistake forgiveness for weakness. But true forgiveness, I realized, isn't about them. It's about no longer letting the wound define you. On a Tuesday afternoon, a small package arrived. No return address. I turned it over in my hands before opening it. Inside was a folded note and a velvet pouch, the same kind I used to keep the watch in. The handwriting was David's. "Mom, I know you don't want to hear from me. But I couldn't keep pretending. I don't expect forgiveness, I just want you to know I'm sorry. We sold something that wasn't ours. And it cost us everything we didn't see coming. Victoria left, I lost my job, maybe that's what I deserved. Please take this, it's yours." Inside the pouch was a small gold bracelet. My bracelet, the one Robert gave me on our 25th anniversary. Engraved, still counting. I ran my fingers over the tiny inscription. The metal was warm from travel, like it had been carried close. I didn't cry, I just set it next to the watch. Time had found its way home again. One piece at a time. That evening, I made myself a proper dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a glass of red wine. I ate slowly, savoring every bite. After so many years of cooking for others, I'd forgotten how good it felt to cook for peace. As I cleared the table, I found myself whispering, "You'd be proud of him, Robert." Then I corrected myself, maybe not proud, but maybe hopeful. The next morning, Ruth came by to help take down the Christmas decorations I'd never put up. We laughed about it, how we used to go overboard with tinsel when the boys were small. When she saw the bracelet on the table, she touched it gently. "He sent it back?" "Yes," I said, "it's a start." "Are you going to call him?" I shook my head. "Not yet, some things need time to echo before they land right." She nodded, understanding. After she left, I walked outside. The snow was melting, revealing patches of green beneath. The air smelled of thawing earth, hope, in a quiet disguise. I took the watch from my wrist and held it against my chest. "You see, Robert," I said softly, "even broken things can find their way back." The wind carried my words somewhere unseen, and I smiled. Later that week, I drove into town for groceries. I hadn't been out in days. At the market, people greeted me by name again. "Mrs. Turner, haven't seen you in a while." I smiled politely. "Just taking my time," I said. When I left the store, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street. David stood by the driver's side, hands in his pockets. He looked thinner, older, like the years had finally caught up. He didn't approach, just nodded. A silent greeting. I nodded back. No words, no anger, just recognition. He climbed back into the car and drove away. And somehow, that was enough. That night, I added a new line to my notebook. You don't always have to watch people fall to know they've changed. Sometimes seeing them stand again is proof enough. I closed the book and looked around the room. The house felt alive again. Not because of who was in it, but because of what I'd reclaimed inside myself. Cleo purred at my feet. The clock ticked on the wall. The watch on the dresser matched its rhythm perfectly. I poured myself another glass of wine and sat by the window. Outside, the moon reflected off the melting snow, turning everything silver. I thought of Robert, of how he'd taught me that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just keeps going. And that's what I did. The next morning, I put on the bracelet. It rested easily beside the watch, like it had been waiting all this time. I whispered, still counting. Then I opened the window, letting the cold morning air in. A new day, clean and quiet, ready to be lived. The snow melted for good by late February. The ground was soft again, and the roses I thought were dead began to stir beneath the frost. I took it as a sign. Life had a strange way of returning when you finally stopped begging it to. One morning, while trimming the bushes, I saw the mail truck stop at my driveway. The carrier waved and handed me an envelope. It was from David again, but the handwriting looked steadier this time. Mom, I'm moving back to Brookfield. Got a small job at the hardware store. I'm renting a place near the river. I don't expect anything from you, but I wanted you to know I'm trying. There was no plea for forgiveness this time. Just truth, honest and plain. I stood in the sunlight, reading it twice, then folded it neatly and slipped it into my coat pocket. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm. Tea at sunrise. A walk to the post office. Dinner at 6. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore, it felt earned. Every sound in the house, the clock, the creak of the floorboards, the soft meow from Cleo, was a reminder that I'd survived what was meant to break me. One afternoon, I stopped by Frank's shop to thank him again. The bell above the door chimed as I entered. Well, if it isn't my favorite customer, he said, grinning. How's that watch holding up? Better than I expected, I replied. It's been through worse. He laughed softly. So have you. We talked a while. When I left, he handed me a small cloth he'd stitched himself, embroidered with the word time in faded blue thread. A little something for the memory of it all, he said. I tucked it in my purse. Some kindnesses didn't need repayment, just remembrance. Days turned into weeks. Spring finally came, green and alive. The roses bloomed again, wild and uneven, just the way Robert liked them. I found myself humming while watering them, something I hadn't done since he passed. It was a Tuesday when I saw David again. I'd gone to the farmer's market early. Before the crowd arrived, he was there, bagging apples behind a wooden stall. His uniform was plain, his smile hesitant. When he noticed me, he froze, then nodded slowly. Hi, Mom. I stepped closer. Hi, David. He looked thinner, but there was color in his face again, and humility in his voice. You look good, he said. So do you, I replied. We stood there, unsure of what to say next. The noise of the market filled the spaces between us, voices. Laughter, a radio playing old country songs. Finally, I asked, do you still have the job at the hardware store? Yeah, he said. It's steady work, nothing fancy. Steady's good, I said. Fancy never lasts. He smiled faintly. You're right about that. Before leaving, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. Dad's watch, he said quietly. It looks right on you. I took the photo, nodding once. It does. Then I walked away, and he didn't follow. That was enough. That evening, I found myself at the dining table again. The photograph between my hands. Robert's eyes in David's face. It was uncanny. Almost painful, but the pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft, like an echo. I placed the photo beside the watch, aligning the edges. Maybe he'll learn, I said aloud. Not to anyone. Just into the air. Maybe we all will. Cleo leapt onto the chair across from me, curling into a perfect circle. The sound of her purring filled the silence. A few nights later, Ruth visited with a casserole and her usual advice. You could invite him for Sunday dinner. You know. I smiled. Not yet. Maybe someday. She set the dish on the counter. You always take your time. Myrtle. I've earned the right to. I said. Ruth laughed, kissed my cheek, and left me to the quiet. Later, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. In the distance, the river glimmered beneath the moonlight. I wound the watch, listening to its soft rhythm. Tick, time given. Tick, time taken. Tick, time returned. The sound filled the room, steady and patient. I leaned back in the chair, the bracelet warm against my wrist, the watch gleaming under the lamp. Robert once told me that every tick was a promise to keep living. No matter what was lost. For the first time, I finally understood. I looked at the empty chair across from me, smiled faintly, and whispered, "We're okay now, love, the time you left behind, it's safe." Then I turned off the light and let the house settle into the soft rhythm of the night, where grief had become gratitude, and silence sounded like peace. Spring deepened into April. The air smelled of lilacs and rain, and the town began to stir after months of gray. I swept the porch, humming under my breath, when the phone rang inside. It was the attorney. "Jonathan, Mrs. Turner, I wanted to confirm your file is officially closed. Everything regarding the estate has been secured." "Thank you," I said, "that chapter's done." He paused. "You sound lighter." "I am," I replied, and meant it. When I hung up, I stood for a while in the doorway, listening to the birds. The same house that had once held so much sorrow now felt alive again. Peace wasn't loud, it whispered. That afternoon, Ruth came by with a basket of strawberries and a grin. "They're sweet this year," she said. "Try one." I bit into one, the juice bright and tart. "You're right," I said. We sat on the porch, talking about nothing important. For once, we didn't circle back to family or loss. Just stories about gardens, weather, and recipes we'd already forgotten. It felt easy. Before she left, she looked at me with that knowing smile. "You seem settled." "I finally am." "Then keep it that way," she said. "Don't let anyone stir the dust." That night, after dinner, I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea. The streetlights glowed in soft halos through the glass. Cleo slept on the rug near the fireplace. The phone buzzed once more. David again. I stared at it for a moment before answering. "Hi, Mom." His voice was quiet, careful. "Hello, David. I didn't want to bother you," he said. I wanted to say I got promoted. The manager said I've been doing good work." "That's good," I said. "I'm glad you're finding your way." He hesitated. "I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know." "I know," I replied, "and I hope you keep doing right. That's all I ever wanted." There was a long silence. Then he said, softer, "I'll never forget what I did." "Mom." "You're not supposed to," I said, "just learn from it." When the call ended, I sat there for a while, letting the quiet return. The ache that used to follow his voice wasn't there anymore. Only calm. The next morning, I woke early. The sunlight stretched across the floor like gold ribbon. I put on my robe, wound the watch, and felt its faint vibration against my fingertips. It was strange how something so small could hold so much love, grief, time, truth. I placed it on my wrist, next to the bracelet David had sent back. They looked right together, pieces of a story that had finally found an ending. At noon, I went into town for groceries. On the way back, I stopped by the river bridge. The water below sparkled under the sun. Rushing but calm, I leaned on the railing, breathing in the cool air. I thought of Robert, of our mornings at this same spot. Coffee in hand, laughter carried by wind. I whispered, "You'd like it today. It feels honest." The wind picked up, brushing my hair across my face. I smiled and let it. Back home, I cooked lunch, just soup and bread. Simple and warm. I ate slowly, listening to the soft hum of the clock on the wall. Each second stretched in peace instead of regret. I remembered what Jonathan had said, "Your file is closed." But I knew something he didn't. Some stories don't close, they just stop hurting. Evening came quietly. I lit a candle near Robert's picture. The flame flickered, and I spoke to it like I always did. I kept my promise. I whispered. I protected what mattered. Cleo brushed against my leg. A small, living comfort. Outside, the sky turned lavender, the kind of color that never stays long, but makes you grateful it appeared at all. I looked down at the watch, still ticking. Steady, defiant. It had outlived betrayal, outlived sorrow, and in its rhythm, I heard my own heartbeat again. Before bed, I opened my notebook one last time. There wasn't much room left on the final page. I wrote slowly, carefully, so the words wouldn't tremble. Time doesn't heal, it teaches, and when you finally listen, it gives you peace. I closed the book and placed it beside the watch. The candle burned lower, the house breathed, and for the first time in years, I felt no weight in my chest, only warmth. As I turned off the light, I whispered into the dark, "Good night, Robert, the time we built still stands." And somewhere between the ticking and the silence, I fell asleep smiling. The days grew longer, warmer, the roses bloomed in full color, and the air carried the soft hum of bees. I spent most mornings in the garden now, wearing Robert's old sun hat and tending to the plants he once called our quiet company. Every time I bent to cut a stem or brush dirt from a leaf, I felt time stretching, not behind me, but forward. The watch ticked steadily on my wrist, its rhythm no longer a reminder of loss, but of presence. Life had become quiet again, not empty, peaceful. One afternoon, I went into town to visit the post office. The clerk handed me a small envelope. The return address read, Brookfield Hardware. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mom, the shop's hosting a community fair this weekend. I'll be working the booth, fixing watches for donations. I thought you might want to stop by. There'll be live music, nothing fancy. Hope you're well." It wasn't a plea, or an apology, just an invitation. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my purse. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how strange and fragile redemption looked, like something that could only exist if you didn't reach for it too quickly. Saturday came with sunlight. The fair stretched along Main Street, children chasing balloons, vendors selling pies, the smell of fried dough in the air. I walked slowly, nodding at familiar faces. Then I saw him. David stood behind a small table with a magnifying glass and a tray of old watches. His hands moved with quiet care, like he'd learned patience the hard way. When he noticed me, his breath caught, but he didn't rush. He just gave a small, careful nod. "Hi, Mom." "Hi," I said softly. He looked at the Rolex on my wrist. "Still ticking?" "Always," I said. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The noise of the fair faded into something distant. Then he gestured to an empty chair beside him. "You can sit, if you want." I did. He worked quietly, adjusting a tiny spring on a broken pocket watch. His hands didn't shake. His expression was calm, focused. "I've been fixing these for months," he said. "It's strange, isn't it, how something so small can stop an entire world when it breaks?" I nodded. "You just have to learn how to wind it again." He smiled a little. "Yeah, guess I do." We sat there for nearly an hour. People came and went, dropping off watches, thanking him, leaving coins in a jar marked for the town's youth program. When he finally looked up again, he said quietly, "You look happy, Mom." "I am," I replied, "and I think you're getting there too." He nodded slowly. "I'm trying." Before I left, he reached into his pocket and handed me a small cloth bag. "It's not much," he said, "but I made it myself." Inside was a simple keychain, brass, hand-stamped with the word time. The letters were uneven, imperfect, human. I closed my hand around it, Thank you, David. He looked down, his voice breaking a little. I don't deserve it. I stood and rested my hand on his shoulder. Maybe not, but you're earning it. When I got home, the house smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets I'd hung near the windows. I placed the keychain beside the watch on the dresser. Two different kinds of time. One that carried the past. One that promised the future. I poured a glass of lemonade, sat on the porch, and watched the sky turn gold. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the ache of what was gone, just gratitude for what remained. Later that evening, Ruth called. I heard you went to the fair. She said, did you see him? I did. How'd it go? Like time starting again, I said. She was quiet for a second. I'm proud of you, Myrtle. I think Robert would be too. Then you've done your part, she said gently, now just live. The porch light flickered as I hung up. I looked out at the roses, glowing pale in the moonlight. The wind carried the scent through the open door. Cleo stretched at my feet, letting out a soft yawn. I wound the watch one more time and whispered, another day kept. The second hand swept forward, steady, unbroken. Before bed, I opened my notebook again and wrote one final note on a blank page. Some wounds don't close, they bloom. And in their petals, you find strength you never asked for, but always had. I closed the book, placed it beside the watch, and turned off the lamp. The house was silent except for the ticking, faithful, soft, alive. And I let it carry me into the night, where peace finally stayed. Summer arrived early that year. The mornings were filled with light, spilling through the kitchen windows like something alive. I woke with the birds now, brewed my coffee, and let the day unfold without hurry. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full, with peace, with memory, with the rhythm of a life that had finally come back to itself. The watch still ticked on my wrist. Every morning I wound it once. The same way Robert used to before work. Every turn of the crown felt like a prayer answered in silence. A few weeks after the fair, I received another letter. This one came on simple stationery. No return address, but the handwriting was David's again. Mom, thank you for coming. I didn't realize how much I missed just sitting beside you. I've been saving up for a small shop of my own. Maybe one day I'll call it Turner Repairs. Every time I fix a watch, I think of Dad, and of you. I hope I make you proud. I read it slowly, then folded it and placed it in the drawer beside the others. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about continuation. Time moving forward in the right direction. That evening, I took a walk by the river. The air smelled of honeysuckle and warm water. The current shimmered gold under the setting sun, just like it had all those years ago when Robert and I used to come here. I sat on the same bench where we'd once shared sandwiches and laughter. The wood was rougher now, worn by weather, but solid. I ran my fingers across it, smiling. You were right, I whispered. Time doesn't heal, it teaches. The wind lifted my words and carried them down the river. I took the watch off my wrist and held it up to the fading light. The gold caught the sun, reflecting it in small, steady flashes. For a moment, I saw everything, the past, the betrayal, the forgiveness, the quiet strength it took to stand again. All of it contained in one heartbeat of time. Then I placed the watch gently back against my wrist and closed the clasp. Still ticking, I said softly. When I returned home, the house greeted me with warmth. The smell of baked bread lingered from the afternoon, and Cleo stretched lazily near the door. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the table. The notebook lay open in front of me, waiting. I didn't need to write much anymore. The story had already been told in the way the watch kept perfect time. In the way the garden bloomed despite the storms. In the way peace had found its way back. Still, I picked up the pen and wrote the final line. I lost faith in family once. But I never lost faith in love. Love just took a different shape, quieter, wiser, and all mine. I closed the notebook and slid it into the drawer beside the watch and the bracelet. The symbols of everything I had lived through, pain, memory, forgiveness, resting side by side. That night, I lit one candle near Robert's photograph. The flame danced gently, reflecting in the glass. I did it, love, I said. I kept the promise. The time you gave me, I used it well. The room stayed still, but I felt him there anyway. In the quiet, in the steady rhythm of the ticking that never stopped. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, watching the last light fade. For the first time, the silence didn't need words. It said enough. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain. Gentle, cleansing, endless. I stepped onto the porch and watched it fall across the garden, dripping from every rose petal like soft applause. I smiled, closed my eyes, and let the sound wash over me. Behind me, through the open door, the clock on the wall and the watch on my wrist ticked in perfect unison. Time, once broken, was whole again. And I was finally free.